still on the hunt for a better way to track my daily reading, but I currently use the Kindle app. The number shown here has been tracking since the 31st of December 2021 technically, but this became a goal for me on the very first day of the year 2022. So I've read every day for the last 568 days, including today.
Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Ope and I love talking about things I love and things that bring me joy. So one of those things is reading, and I'm consistently working towards kind of upping the ante and defining myself as an avid reader. So in this video, I'll be going over my decision to read every day and how it can be useful for you as well. A lot of what I'll be sharing are things I learned from 3 specific books: Atomic Habit by James Clear, Limitless by Jim Quick, and Ikigai by Frances Morales and Hector Garcia. So to kind of give a short summary of all 3 books, Atomic Habits is a great read for habit development and building. Ikigai is good for developing good quality of life. The subtitle of the book is The Japanese Secret to a Long and Happy Life. And lastly, Limitless is a great read for lifelong and efficient learning. And my learnings from these books will be useful not only for people who want to be more disciplined readers like myself, but also for people who want to develop the habit of reading. I think they're all amazing books and you can let them be your key takeaway from this video. There will be links to all 3 of them in the description below. So to start off, I'm going to describe myself as a reader and my history as one. Reading is absolutely one of my favorite things to do. I love reading and I've always loved and enjoyed reading a lot since I was a kid. I never really struggled with it, and sure, there were times when I would go through a reading slump, especially after I started working a 9-to-5 job, and reading didn't always feel relaxing. So sometimes all you really want to do after a long and stressful day when you start working, as adults do, is just watch some mindless source of entertainment. But I also happen to be a pretty voracious reader who is kind of determined to read as many books as possible in my mortal life. So I read a little bit of everything and I want to read a lot more of them. The only criteria for me to read is just it being a good story. And I recently had a conversation with someone about how that led me to enjoy other forms of media. So I'm talking media like anime, comics, like manga, manhwa, and like other Western graphic novels, Asian dramas, music, art, and so on. So ultimately, I think they're all telling you a story, and I just love a good story in general. Having said all that, you're probably wondering why I still feel the need to read every day when I don't necessarily struggle with reading. So I'll start with my why. Although I read a lot, actually deciding to read every day was still very much a habit-forming action for me. And now I don't know about you, but I think the first and most important item for goal setting and habit formation is defining your why. Mine happened to be pretty simple, and I broke them down into 2 main reasons. The first one was that I wanted to read more. Reading more ties directly into what I mentioned earlier about being determined to read as many books as possible in my unfortunately mortal life. I know I can't read every book, but I would like to read as much as is humanly possible for me. And my second reason is I tend to read a lot more trashy, mindless stuff if I'm not being mindful or conscious of what I'm reading. I'm talking about like books that don't require a lot of brain power to process them, and they don't really add any value to my life beyond just enjoying the fact that I'm reading them. So I wanted to dilute a lot of my trashy reading with more substantial material. Another tendency of mine is that I go through reading phases where I'm sticking to just one genre, and it was starting to happen more often. So I wanted to diversify my reading a little bit more. Other people might have a little bit more detailed reasons, but these 2 worked for me just fine. So we've gone a little bit over my history as a reader and my why, but what did my reading look like before, and what was my vision for the future? So in the past, I'll start a new year with the generic goal of how many books I wanted to read that year, and then break that goal down a little bit more for diversity. So like I'll try to read 1 nonfiction book per month. I always wanted to read award-winning literature in different genres, and just generally material that I could learn from. But it also wasn't enough for me to just set a goal of the number of books I wanted to read yearly, because once I reach or don't reach that number, then what? I think goal setting is great because it gives you something pretty specific to expend your time and energy towards, but it can also shoot you in the foot and work against you if that's your only focus and you achieve it only to feel lost after achieving that goal. There is a quote in Atomic Habits that I think perfectly describes this, and the quote goes, "Goals are at odds with long-term progress. Once the goal is achieved, you slide back into former habits." If I say I want to read 100 books in a year and I meet that goal halfway through the year, I don't really have a specific reason to read as much as I was reading before I actually met that goal. And here's where Atomic Habits comes in. The book walks you through a variety of ways to create new habits, but I'll be focusing on 3 main principles. The first and most important one was one that took my 3rd read of the book for it to really stand out. So in the book, James Clear talks about a mindset shift to being the person who does things. The most effective way to change your habit is to focus on who you want to be. That's an identity-based goal, not just what you want to achieve, an outcome-based goal. The mindset shift here is asking yourself the question, what kind of person do I want to be versus what kind of goal do I want to achieve? And for me, that meant going beyond reading a certain number of books yearly. I wanted to be an avid reader, and that led to me defining my identity as a reader as one who reads every day. So my goal shifted from what I wanted to read, or I want to read a certain number of books, to I want to be the kind of reader that reads every day. And I was very aware that reading every day might not necessarily translate to me reading more, but I was more than okay with that. The main goal was to read every day, and whatever result that generated was just going to be an added bonus. The second principle is one that comes from the 4 laws of behavioral change mentioned in the book. The 3rd law, make it easy. In the book, James Clear talks about how energy is precious, so as humans, our real motivation is to be lazy and do what is convenient for us. This goes hand in hand with making your habits as easy as possible by priming your environment and reducing the friction between your plans and actions. I'm going to tie this into the 3rd principle I'll be sharing, which is habit stacking. This is basically stacking a new habit you're trying to create onto one that you've already established. I'll give you an example that's not related to reading, as it's been pretty easy for me to fit reading into my routine. So I have really terrible digestive health, and one habit I've been trying to develop is using probiotics and some multivitamins every day, as well as drinking a glass of water when I wake up and before I go to bed. So to make this possible, I tied it into my established nighttime routine, removing my Apple Watch to charge it every night before I get into bed and putting it on first thing in the morning. This is my bedside table. I have my probiotics and vitamins on the same bedside table where I charge my watch, as well as a glass cup. So at night, after I remove my watch to charge it, which is the established habit, I'll go drink a glass of water and refill it to place on my bedside table for the following morning. And when I wake up in the morning and put on my watch, I'll use my probiotics and multivitamins that are right next to my watch and drink my glass of water that I filled out the night before. So that's the new habit that I've been able to incorporate into my established habit. And this has worked for me for the past year. And the only time I ever really have to modify it is when I'm traveling. By stacking that new habit onto one that I already had and making it visible, I made it easy to put into action. So if you want to develop the habit of reading or reading more, you have to ask yourself, what are some ways I can make this as easy as possible? Maybe even employ the method of habit stacking. There are several helpful methods in the book if you give it a read. I'm just trying to sell the book as a good read in general. I know people would recommend Atomic Habits a lot, but just in case you've never heard about it, this is a great opportunity to read the book as well as the other 2 books that I'm recommending or that I'm using as references in this video. So far, I've only talked about the 1 book, so how did the other 2 tie into my habit building? Atomic Habits helps me lay down the foundation for my habit formation, and as for the day-to-day actions that will make me more efficient at building that habit, I'll be sharing things I learned from the other 2 books. For Limitless by Jim Quick, I'll take it back to the 2 reasons I stated as my why in the beginning of the video. Limitless is a book that teaches you to accelerate your learning, improve your memory, and kind of enhance your brain's performance. And I read this book because I wanted to be able to read and remember what I read, which is the memory aspect of the book. But I took away so much more from the book. For reading more, the book goes over a series of speed reading tests that will help you to read faster while also retaining that information. So as someone who wanted to read more, this was amazing to me. I followed the exercises in the book and have gone back to them a couple of times, and it's just as effective every single time. If you want to read faster and also remember what you read, this book is a great resource. There are also apps that are good at helping you achieve the same thing. And my second why was that I wanted to diversify my reading. A technique that was shared in Limitless for remembering everything you read is the Pomodoro technique. So the Pomodoro technique is a time management method based on 25-minute stretches of focused work followed by 5-minute breaks. The effectiveness of the technique lies in breaking up the time you devote to focused work to make room for breaks. So diversifying my reading sometimes means that I'm reading books I don't particularly feel like reading or I just struggle to read. And I currently use the Pomodoro technique to accomplish this part of my why, especially when I don't particularly feel like reading a book. All I have to do is sit down for 25 minutes and read for those 25 minutes. Sometimes I'm able to do more than one Pomodoro session where after my 5-minute break, I just keep on reading because I'm actually enjoying what I'm reading or I'm learning from it. And other times it's just that one session. We all have those days. And the session, I don't think the session strictly needs to be 25 minutes of work to a 5-minute break. You can make it 50 minutes of work to a 10-minute break, or even shorter still if you don't have that much time. Just make it work for you. The last thing I learned from Limitless is one that was also mentioned consistently in the last book, Ikigai. Limitless discusses digital distraction and the need to stay unplugged to avoid it. So digital distraction, like being distracted by your iPhone or your TV, social media, all of those things. And in a similar note, Ikigai talks about how we should not deceive ourselves into thinking we can multitask. Live your life free of distractions and just be present in the moment. So this meant two things for me initially. If I set time apart to read, that was all I was going to be doing. And for genres like nonfiction, I had to read them as a physical book to avoid distraction if I was reading an ebook, for example. I can't tell you how many times I read on my phone or iPad, and before I know it, I'm mindlessly scrolling through social media. Even for audiobooks, sometimes I'll zone out on what I'm listening to, and then I'll have to rewind it to re-listen to the same thing multiple times. And with a physical book, although you're not completely free of distractions, I think there's less of them, and the added effort of reading a book that's actually in your hand makes it a little bit easier to focus on the content of the book. Now, I still very much prefer to read a lot of my nonfiction as physical books, but if I have to read them as ebooks, I've trained myself to avoid distractions for the most part just by employing that in the initial phases of developing my goal to read every day. So now I'm going to list out the tips I've shared so far and then some additional ones before wrapping up the video. The very first thing I did in developing my goal was defining my why. This helps you to be very specific on why you want to achieve the goal that you're achieving. The second one was to make your goal identity versus outcome based for your goal setting. So ask yourself, what kind of person do I want to be versus what kind of outcome do I want to achieve? The third tip was to make your goal or the action that leads to achieving that goal as easy as possible. The fourth one was habit stacking. Habit stacking is where you stack a new goal onto an already established one to make it easy, going back to the previous tip. The fifth tip was speed reading. Not necessary for everyone, but I wanted to speed read because I wanted to read more while also retaining the information that I was getting from reading. The sixth one was the Pomodoro technique, where you're able to read and retain information by working in blocks. So 25 minutes of focused work to a 5-minute break, and you just keep working in sessions like that. The seventh one was avoiding digital distraction. Do not deceive yourself into thinking that you can be distracted and retain information. It's not going to work. The eighth one was do not multitask. I know a lot of people, myself included, can deceive ourselves into thinking that we can multitask and still be able to efficiently do things, but studies have proven that we cannot multitask. So if you're reading, I highly recommend that you just focus on reading. And probably the most important action that I haven't mentioned in all of this is to track your progress in whatever way works for you. At the beginning of the video, you can see that I track mine by counting the number of days that I've read so far. And honestly, it's very fulfilling to see that number increase daily. Some additional tips that I have for people who want to develop the habit of reading are try to read different genres, because this might be effective in just helping you figure out what you like if you're not used to reading a lot. There's no need to necessarily pigeonhole yourself by sticking to a specific genre just because you enjoy something there. The worst thing that can happen if you try something new is that you decide you don't like it, but you never really know until you give it a try. My second tip is that you should read multiple books at once. I definitely employ this tip a lot. The most number of books I've probably read at the same time will be like 7, but for the most part, I stick to about 2 to 3, especially when I'm reading like nonfiction. If all I'm doing is reading some nonfiction, there are some of them that would just bore you out of your brains and you don't feel like reading them anymore. So I'll balance it with a fiction or a book that's pretty exciting to read. The third one is to get over trying to finish every book you read. Now, up until like a year ago, I used to force myself to read and finish absolutely every book I read because I just thought I'd already invested some time into starting the book and I wanted to see it through completion. That's a waste of your time. You're expending effort and energy into reading something that you know that you're not going to enjoy. It's just a waste of your time. Don't do it. Right now, I've set a goal that if I get to about 25% of a book and I'm not enjoying it, that book has to go. I'm going to mark it as a DNF, which stands for did not finish. The very last tip I have for new readers is for you to enjoy the process. Like, reading should be fun, so try as much as possible to enjoy the process. Make your reading work for you. I've shared a lot of tips in this video, but you do not have to apply every single one that I've mentioned or even apply them the exact way that I've shared them. You have to kind of pose the questions that I pose to myself in a way that it applies to you and then modify them to work for you. Try as much as possible to make your reading fun. So that brings this video to an end, and all the tips I've shared will be listed in the description with chapters linked to them where I'm talking about them. And I hope you've been able to take at least one helpful thing away from everything that I've shared today. I will see you in my next video, and whatever day you find yourself watching this, make it a great one. Bye.